some bagpipes in honor of Edith Lumley Lindsay Hull. From the book we call Life and the scripture we call Poetry, these words to bring us into this space together, Talking to Grief by Denise Levertov. Ah, grief, I should not treat you like a homeless dog who comes to the back door for a crust, for a meatless bone. I should trust you. I should coax you into the house and give you your own corner, a worn mat to lie on, your own water dish. You think I don't know you've been lying under my porch? You long for your real place to be readied before winter comes. You need your name, your collar, and a tag. You need the right to warn off intruders, to consider my house your own, and me your person, and yourself my own dog. Welcome, everyone. I'm honored this afternoon to bring us together for a little bit of time together, a little ceremony and reflection, music, and sharing in celebration of the life of Edith, taken from us a year ago this past July 2nd. She was 93 years old. Whenever a very old person, beloved to us, dies, especially when she has for years been disappearing into dementia, that homeless dog called grief has more than likely been hanging around us that whole long time, waiting for welcome, some warmth, a bowl, and a bed. We lost Edith incrementally, and from time to time, grief gazed mournfully at us through the sliding door windows, wanting in, wanting company. On this cold and rainy afternoon, we let grief in, and we cuddle up for a little while with the reality of loss, of mother, of grandmother, and of friend. Our human immortality lies in the stories we tell about those we loved, whose lives have shaped our own. What we know and tell of Edith in the days to come is how she lives forever. We carry her spirit forward in time long after every element that constituted her body has returned to earth to serve life in other ways. Edith's body has now circled back into the mystery from which she was born. We keep here the images, memories, and stories we tell one another in this sacred space and others, and we say goodbye to her embodied presence in our lives. Edith now lives in memory and love in the hearts of those who knew her. I'm going to ask Edith's daughter, Carolyn Menheimer, to come forward to kindle a flame for us in our chalice. We light this chalice now, as we do also in the Stony Brook Fellowship Sanctuary every Sunday morning, and at other times when we gather together to do the work of ministry to one another and to the world outside the circle of this fellowship. This chalice light is the fire of a faith and the heart of a community that welcomes everyone. Believers in something that births and receives us all and holds us in love all our lives, as well as believers in nothing much more than this present moment that we're in right now and this one life unfolding in it. In the cup of each of our hearts, a flame like that flickers the spirit of life within every one of us. At times it sputters and is small, and we need the breath of those around us to encourage it to strength again. Sometimes it burns bright, and we encourage others to come in and share its light and be again inspired. No one here need feel excluded, for this flame has many other holy names, and it burns in many other sanctuaries where human beings come to grow a soul and to love their lives. By this light and in its warmth, we are welcomed when we gather to celebrate, and when we gather to remember, and when we gather to grieve. And from the chalice flame, I'm going to ask Chloe, Edith's granddaughter, and Carolyn's daughter, to come and light this candle here from the chalice. This candle in front of her picture. We can blow it out. Thank you. Represents Edith's spirit here among us. I imagined the sound of the bagpipe drawing her to this space, coming in through the open door to be with us for this particular moment of her continuing existence and ours. Chloe and her cousins, Emily and Claire, will likely carry the flame of Edith's bright spirit further than any others who have known her. I hope that you and they derive a lot of inspiration and sustenance from Edith's story, and that you share the memories that you've collected of her with family and friends, that she may live on in your line. At the heart of our service, of course, is the story of Edith's life, her work and passions, and the particular nature of that light she carried and passed on to all whose hearts she touched. Carolyn and Peggy Schaefer have memories to share, and I will start us off with a brief account of how she spent her time and genius on this earth, just a bare little sketch of her life. And you too, I know that there's some of you who will want to speak. You too will have a chance to add to the picture of who Edith was and how she touched your life during hers. So as you listen to these speakers, there may be something that comes to mind about the Edith Hull that you knew, something that hasn't been mentioned and you really feel ought to be. One of the important functions of this, really, any memorial service, is to create a more complete picture of the person that we came to remember, person we knew in life, so that everyone, even the closest family members, might leave this room knowing more about Edith than they did when they came in. So Edith Lumley Lindsay was born in Edinburgh, Scotland on April 4th, 1928. She was the first and would be the only child of John Lindsay, called Jack, and Edith Stiff Lindsay, called Big Edith in comparison to the Little Edith. When she was still an infant, she had an infection in her mastoid bone near her ear and a fever that affected her hearing for life. She learned to read lips, and in high school, she got her first incredibly cumbersome hearing aid. In 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, her parents were desperate to find a safe haven for their only daughter. They found a place in the Scottish Highlands and sent her there, but she was a city girl, and that countryside is rough, and she did not like it. Jack's brother, Dick, wrote from New York City to offer to care for any of his brother's children who needed shelter until the fracas was over in Europe at that time. They didn't think it would be long. 12-year-old Edith thus sailed alone on the SS Caledonia to join Dick and his wife Emily in their one-bedroom apartment in the Bronx. Soon the family moved into a larger apartment on West 183rd Street, and she entered junior high school in the 6th grade and eventually graduated from Walton High School before rejoining her parents in Edinburgh. She had a fine time in the city with her aunt and uncle, all the adventures you can imagine, the Bronx Zoo, baseball games, Lowe's Paradise Theater, Alexander's department store, Crumbs, which was a deluxe soda fountain on the Grand Concourse, and Schraff's, a chain of restaurants famous for 7-layer cake, to name a few. After the war was over, she returned to Scotland, but it was not a place that was going to be able to fulfill her dreams at that time. There were food shortages, and all the spots for college education were going to returning soldiers. So she returned to New York and went to and graduated from Packer Collegiate in Brooklyn. She met a guy named Harry Wertheimer, who was a vet, at a dance, and their first date was to the opera. And Edith was very impressed with that. They married in 1949 and moved into a house in Brooklyn Heights that Harry's parents had bought for them. And there, their first son, Paul Eric Mannheimer, was born in 1955. Harry, who graduated from Polytechnic Institute with a mechanical engineering degree, eventually got a job in New Jersey. The family moved first to Chester and then bought a house in Morristown, New Jersey, where their second son, Lawrence Philip Mannheimer, named after a favorite teacher of hers in New York, was born in 1957. And Edith's only daughter, the last child, Carolyn Louise Mannheimer, was born in Morristown, New Jersey on the 4th of July, 1965. A late baby. Those years were busy ones with 3 young children and a house to modify and decorate. And when finally the children were going off to school, Edith had some time and inclination to address her own needs for growth and development. So she joined a discussion group on great books of the Western world at the Morristown Library. And there she met Vera Dosey. Her daughter, Julie, is right here, who suggested that Edith might find the lay-led Unitarian Fellowship in Morristown a more comfortable religious home than the Scottish Presbyterianism she had long left behind. And Edith went there the very next Sunday and was warmly welcomed and soon became the regular accompanist on piano and harpsichord on Sundays and for special occasions. She wrote in her memoirs, "I had no inkling how much my future life would change as a result of my association with Unitarian Universalism." Already she was working as a secretary in the Morristown UU office and was deep into denominational affairs, leading the formation of the New Jersey Area Council of Unitarian Churches in 1966. Edith and Harry were divorced in 1968, and Edith moved alone into a $79 a month, 2-bedroom basement apartment on Riverside Drive. She secured a job as church administrator with the Fourth Universalist Society, and she wrote in that capacity, quote, I became a member of almost everybody's family in the congregation. I was usually the first to hear of their personal problems and needs, as well as their joys, and my door was always open. Edith and Harry made a decision to keep the children together in Morristown, a decision that later Edith regretted. In Morristown, there was Harry and their new stepmom. But when she was old enough, Caroline came to stay and adventure with Edith on weekends and for summers. We'll hear more about that, I imagine. One afternoon, when Edith was leaving her office at Fourth Universalist, she found Andy Hull waiting for her in the lobby. Andy and his wife were separating, and he had surmised that her move to the city might indicate that she was in a similar position. They found, of course, in talking, that they had much more than that in common. Classical music, travel, museums, botanical gardens, and an undying interest in people. They enjoyed a lovely courtship which involved all those things, plus meeting each other's families, camping with the kids, and a second opinion from a marriage counselor about whether a once divorced woman would do well to marry a twice divorced man. She said yes. Andy and Edith married at the UU congregation at Shelter Rock in Manhasset on January 3rd in 1972. Andy's mother was there, and his son David and a few friends were present in the green room for that quiet ceremony. They moved to Port Jefferson, nearer to Andy's work at Brookhaven National Laboratory. And Edith took a position as assistant to the newly appointed religious education consultant to the Long Island Area Council of UU congregations. She and Andy at the time were making their first forays into involvement at this congregation, where actually Andy and his previous wife, Claire, had signed as members in 1964. When Edith and Andy decided to reoccupy Andy's home in Shoreham, which had been rented out during their courtship. From 1976 to 1988, Edith handled all the secretarial needs of the UU Metro District Board. And from 1988 to 2002, she served as the Metro District Administrator, in which she became everything to everyone UU once again, but on a much bigger scale. And she was good at it. She signed the membership book here at UUFSB in 1978, served as president of the congregation pretty soon after that, 3 years later, and Andy did the same in 1985, one term, 1986, the next. Edith was instrumental in encouraging this lay-led fellowship towards professional ministry in the mid-'80s. She played a role in creating the fellowship's memorial garden, and she served on the committee that managed it until 2012 or so, when we transitioned to give that to our administrator, that work. And I'm sure you'll hear more about her doings here from others who will speak later. She loved this faith. She loved this place and the flow of friends that is this congregation. She loved traveling with Andy to all his professional destinations around the world. She loved gardening and cooking and learning new things and crossword puzzles, visiting family and friends. She loved her daughter, Caroline, and granddaughters, Chloe, Azure, is it Azure or Azure? Azure, Lindsay, and Emily Grace, and Claire Lindsay Mannheimer, Larry's children. And she loved her boys and grieved their early loss. Larry in a biking accident in Golden Gate Park in 1997, and Paul in Boston in 2015. the marker, as we look back, the marker in time of her entry into dementia, or obvious dementia, anyway. And then finally, at Jefferson's Ferry, Edith met Arnold Peterson, and they enjoyed a partnership together for the 11 years that remained to Arnold. Edith was a beautiful woman, attractive, friendly, engaging, elegant, put together, and an organizing guru. I count myself lucky in the work that I shared with her here, in conversations we had in her apartment and by her garden beds where she was giving me a tour, and in the lunches that we shared with other UUs at Jefferson's Ferry, and in the end, doing jigsaw puzzles together. We would work on them when words mostly were failing Edith. And she came here at the end of her life, even after the puzzles, and would sit and enjoy the service. It appeared, and I'm hoping that something about this place was ringing a bell in her heart, remembering her years here. I miss her, I have missed her, and I will miss and remember her. Our Edith. Caroline, do you think you have it together? Come talk. I think you don't need that.
No.
Okay.
Built in.
You can take that off
Okay.
when you speak, and make sure you're right up to it.
Okay. Hi. Thank you for coming. Yeah, the bagpipes threw me a little bit. I am from Minneapolis, and it took quite a stressful project to get here. A lot of things that could go wrong went wrong, and I just was the opposite of my mother, who never had meltdowns. I had several. So I didn't really prepare anything. I figured I'll wing it. I'm an actor. I can do that. Well, I woke up at 5 this morning and I said, no, I really shouldn't be winging it, my mother's memorial. So I started to think, what stories would I like to share? And so many sort of flooded me, and several rose to the top, I guess I would describe it as. But I think I'll just share one with you, because you guys knew her when she was older. And I realized something, too, when thinking about this, just a little story in time, basically. When my parents divorced, she moved into the city. My brothers were much older than me, so I was still about 3 when that happened. So I spent weekends with her. And it was just me and Mom time. My brothers didn't know anything what I did with my mom. My dad didn't know. My family in Morristown and friends in Morristown didn't know. It was just me and Mom on Riverside Drive in the city. And Saturdays, she would always plan a trip to a museum or the ballet or a Broadway play or the zoo. And then Sundays, we would go to the Unitarian Fellowship on Central Park West. So I spent a lot of time there, and I have vivid memories of that amazing building that looked like a castle to a 4-year-old. And while I was thinking about all of those wonderful things that she did with me, I realized that my most favorite times were the quiet times with her. And she would do something that I loved so much. She would buy me the 64 Crayola crayons with those amazing colors and the amazing names for every color, and the sharpener in the back. And she would always have a new coloring book for me. And we would lay down on the floor, and I would take one page, and she would take the next, and we would color. And I honed my coloring skills in that apartment, and I got really good at it. And she taught me to outline the objects with dark really heavy hand, and then when you scribbled it in, the wax would keep you from going outside of the lines. However, she also taught me that skies do not need to be blue, trees don't need to be green and brown, oceans don't need to be blue or green, and I can use whatever colors I want. So I think that's somewhat of a metaphor for my mother. She was quietly contained, like the objects that I traced around, but also quietly unconventional. And just the fact that she moved into the city, she actually took my older brother's Doors albums and moved into the city and left her kids behind in 1968. Nobody did that. You know, single fathers now are a thing, but then it was really unusual. And I grew to appreciate her strength and her ability to put people at ease. And she's had an amazing life. She's just a survivor, and I hope an inspiration to my daughter and to my nieces, certainly one to me. And her and Andy were a wonderful couple. You know, the old thing, I didn't want to like my stepfather, but I did like him. And I'm just so glad that she had love and friends in her life. And I do imagine her spirit still making the Atlantic crossing. She spends sometimes in Edinburgh and sometimes here, one island to another. I think that's it. I was going to repeat, I'm not going to do that. Okay, thank you, and I love you, and my mom loved you, and I'm sure she will always be around.
Oh, that leaves me wanting more stories, especially the unconventional part. She was, she had hidden depths in which she had a lot of fun, I think. So Peggy Schaefer is watching the live stream. And I'm going to read her remarks. I made one correction, Peggy, see if you can see what it is. Here's what she says. I first knew Edith for over 20 years as the stepmother of my first husband. She married Andy Hull in the early 70s, a year or two before I married his son, David. It seems to me that Edith immediately became a strong but quiet force in a large and often noisy extended family. She and Andy Hull were deeply devoted to each other, sharing their lives and their many passions: gardening, Unitarian Universalism, progressive politics, and travel, to name a few. Their home in Shoreham, Long Island, was a home base for Hull gatherings for many years and was always full of books and music. Over the years, I came to appreciate Edith's agreeable and non-judgmental nature and to see it as her strength. When they visited us in North Carolina, she was always glad to go along with whatever plans we had, whatever expeditions to the Appalachian Mountains in the middle of winter, or a 6-year-old's birthday party. Edith was always agreeable, enthusiastic, and helpful. Her strengths were quiet, but considerable. Perhaps because she had grown up in Edinburgh, Scotland, before spending her teen years in the Bronx, she learned how to go with the flow while also remaining true to herself. I loved hearing stories about her early life in Scotland, although it actually sounded pretty grim. Her life story was always very impressive to me. I didn't know anyone else who'd left both her parents and her home country behind to return to the place where she'd come of age, to build a new and more ambitious life for herself. It must have taken real courage to take those risks. Andy loved trains and train travel, and the two of them would take trains wherever they could, whether slow and clunky Amtrak trains chugging across the US or overnight trains in Europe. Edith always seemed delighted to go along with Andy's extensive itineraries. They traveled on the rails for days, often happily sleeping in their seats, arriving in Paris or Milan or wherever in the morning, and spending a full day tromping through museums before boarding another overnight train to their next destination. Just following their travels on the postcards they sent was exhausting. I have fond memories of Edith's kindness and generosity. When my daughter was 9 or 10, she announced she wanted to be a cheerleader, and I was in no mood to indulge this nonsense. I must have mentioned this to Edith. And when Christmas came, Edith sent her a cheerleading video. And this was back in the days before Google or online shopping was a thing. I have no idea how she found it or got it. Edith was often on the cutting edge. She embraced the new technologies of word processing and computers that were transforming her work, editing and writing. And she was the person who first introduced me to pesto, bringing me some from her garden. She was right when she said she knew I'd like it. After Andy died, Edith was bereft, but soon found her way gladly to her last home at Jefferson's Ferry. I remember trying to call her a year or so later and never getting any answer for weeks. Finally, fearing the worst, I called the administrative office and asked them what was up with Edith Hull. And as I recall, I was put on hold for quite a while. Finally, someone came back on the line and gave me another number to call for someone named Arnold. So that's how I learned that Edith had found a new partner with whom she found happiness again. I savor my memories of this strong and quiet woman who made her way across the world, shared her talents generously, and found happiness wherever she went. She definitely bloomed where she was planted. May her memory be a blessing. Thank you, Peggy. And thank you, Caroline. We'll pause here to take a breath and rest for a moment in the pieces of the story we've collected. A minute or so of silence in the room will give us a little space for our own feelings and thoughts to arise, and for whatever prayers in our own heart, and a little time to think about what you might want to add during our time of open sharing after the silence and the music that follows. Something you loved about Edith, something you learned from her and will embody in your own life. Something that happened that made an impression on you that lasted. And her friend and UUFSB member Donna Demian was glad to accept the invitation to play for Edith and for those who loved her. After a minute of silence or so, she will play Beethoven's Piano Sonata number 8 in C minor, opus 13, called the Pathétique, the Adagio. So let us now share a minute of silence. Thanks so much, Donna. A gift to us and to her. So, if anybody, well, I'm going to start with a little story, but be thinking. I see that June Cerveni isn't here, and she's the first person who told this little story, and I really think it needs an ear. I mentioned that Edith, I didn't say the details, but Linda's son, Matt, my wife's son, came to pick Edith up at Jefferson's Ferry many times to come to services here. She never knew who he was, even when he told her. But he would ask her, so what do you think of the minister? And she would say, well, she's relatively new, and I don't know her very well. So she never really tracked any of that. But anyway, she would come here, and she would smile and greet people, just like the old Edith. And June was, there was someone assigned to sit with her just to make sure that she didn't wander off or anything like that, and would, know what to do and when. And the collection plates were going around. And June reached into her purse and got, her pledge or whatever out and put it in and passed it to Edith. And Edith reached into her pocket and pulled out some Jefferson's Ferry Monopoly money that she had and put it in for the good of the fellowship. I just love that. So if you have something to share that we didn't say, any of those things that I mentioned earlier, I'd like for you to come and talk through this mic so that the people in the live stream can hear you. Come on up, Shelley.
I'm Shelley Pasaris, and a vivid memory I've had of Edith is when she could not drive anymore, I would take her to Long Island Area Council meetings. And one day I took a wrong turn somewhere on the way there, and she turned to me and said, "What's the matter, honey? Are you having a senior moment?" And I shared it with a dear colleague at work, that story. I don't remember why I did, but I did. And after a while, that colleague lovingly would call me senior. And she had a T-shirt made up for me that said, "Help, I'm having a senior moment." And then the last time Tony and I saw her was when we took her out to eat to Medford Pastoria, where she had, it could have been her 75th birthday or her 80th birthday. I don't recall, but it was a major birthday along with Barbara Diamond. So we had put this together for her, and we decided to take, for memory's sake, take Edith out for a nice meal at Medford Pastoria.
Who else? Got a stair there.
Well, we go back, Shelley and I, a long way. We've known Edith. We joined the fellowship here back in 1978. And Andy, at that time, Andy and Edith were together, and we've known them over the years. And around my neck, I have a bowler tie. Edith put it up on auction. It was Andy's bowler tie. And I won the auction. It's one of my favorite pieces. And over the years, I'll never forget, Edith and I had many conversations. And she was always very thoughtful and very deliberate. And on my 60th birthday, Shelley gave me a party at my house, and Arnold was there with Edith. And Edith was sitting at my kitchen table. And as usual, she was, how do I say it? She had a beautiful hat on, and she looked wonderful. And Arnold and I were in the den, and he said, look at my Edith. Isn't she something? He was totally smitten. And over the years, the one thing I can say about Edith, and it's a term that we don't use often anymore, but she was always a lady. Always a lady. And she was always dear to my heart. And that's Edith for me.
My name is John Lutterby, and I'm president of the Board of Trustees, and I only say that because when we joined the fellowship in 1990, Edith quickly pulled me aside and got me onto the Committee on the Ministry. I didn't belong there, but she thought I did. But it gave me a sense of our need to serve the fellowship, and it's something that without her, I may not have done that as much as I have. Two other things. One is that whenever you went to her house, if you showed any interest in gardening, she sent you home with a plant. And it was a wonderful, wonderful gift. And to show what a lady she is, she joined my wife in the Ladies Poetic Society, and with a very straight face, recited bawdy limericks. And that's how I remember Edith.
I joined the fellowship in 1976, so I was a couple of years before Edith joined, but we joined, I should say, at the hips because of our musical background and experience and her contribution to music at the fellowship and her strength and determination that classical music would be part of our services. And that continues to inform me and always will. And Edith, I know you're listening because you did and you do. And I thank you for your companionship, both in music and in friendship.
I like those stairs much better than that one. Hi, everybody. Joanne Hammer's my name. I met Edith, I guess, right after she came. I think it was 1978. And I remember she was sitting over on the side there. And she's a few years older than I. And I remember looking at her and I thought, oh, look at this beautiful older woman. Gray hair, and she had a smile on her face, and I thought, how sweet she is. I went up to her and, spoke to her, and indeed, that's who she was. And one of my memories of her is going to Shoreham High School way back in the late 70s, and they used to have the Seacliff Chamber players would perform there, and they would perform avant-garde music, which I just loved. I remember one pianist had a mask on. I thought, how cool is that? And dinners at her house, she would pull out a pie from the freezer, an already made pie. And I thought, oh, that's a good thing. People come, you have a pie. So, and she was sweet and kind and organized. Working with her, she had everything to the T. So all those wonderful, wonderful personal qualities. So I think we'll all miss her.
Yikes. I was laughing when you said Edith was always a lady, because I definitely remember those bawdy ditties. Anyway, I'm listening and I'm thinking we were friends on 2 levels. And I think she chose people that had things in common. Tam and Megs and Edith and I were all interested in gardening and food, mostly, anyway. And there is the time that we went up to Row Camp for a gardening weekend, and there were news reports about the blizzard that was coming, but of course we didn't pay too much attention. We just continued until it started to snow heavily, and we made our way down from Vermont, and it was getting dangerous. And we landed up in Bridgeport and spent the night because the ferries were no longer running. And I was telling Carolyn that it was Edith who went in and got the hotel room because she could get a discount because of her age. And the 4 of us spent the night there. And I was thinking also, there was a memorial for Andy. And apparently I'm not a linear thinker, because I was thinking about one of the food things that I participated in the fellowship. And I realized it was really for Molly Begg's husband. It was one of my first things that I participated in, and I couldn't quite figure it out. And then I realized that was for Molly's husband. And the service or the event that Edith asked me to do was for Andy, because he was so well known throughout the area. And so she asked me to cater the event, and I went down to New Jersey and spent the night and did the shopping, part of the shopping for this event. And the two sort of got confused in my mind. But anyway, it was Meg Shea, Tam Scott, me, and Edith that did a lot of gardening things. And she was avid, even when she was at Jefferson Ferry. She had an allotment and a garden, and yeah, she was a special lady. Anyway, I'm glad that I knew her.
This will be our last. You'll be our last speaker. Not least.
Hi, my name is Julie Dosey, and it's just so wonderful to hear about Edith. It gives me a sense of, getting to know her more than I actually did, although my sense of connection with her ties way back to my own roots in Morristown, New Jersey, where I went to, I guess we moved there when I was about in 6th grade. My father was working at Warner Lambert, and my first knowledge of Edith was as Edith Mannheimer, because my father was an avid amateur music player. He played the violin and viola, and Edith played the violin, I believe. And they played together in a local orchestra, the Colonial Little Symphony. And I remember first hearing about Edith and his connection with her there. And then many years went by. I don't know when, that was probably talking about the 50s at that point. So many, many years went by until 2008, when my mother, I was able to move my mother here to Long Island. My father had passed away in 1979. And well, I should just backtrack and say that my own moving to Long Island, I met Edith here at the fellowship, and it was a wonderful connection. She connected me immediately with my father and my parents, and of course you heard the story about my mother meeting her for the Great Books Discussion Club and telling her about Unitarianism. And she wrote about that in her autobiography. It was very moving to me. So 2008 came, my mother came out here to Long Island, and it was a very wonderful moment when I brought my mother here to a service at the fellowship, and the two of them met for the first time in, well, since I guess the 50s. But they knew each other, and Edith was still doing quite well at that point. And then we met with her a few more times, and it was very moving to me, to just the fact that she and my mother connected, but a sense of my own heritage and my own past as well. And even now, I have a very dear friend who lives at Jefferson's Ferry, so I go over there quite frequently. And there's a beautiful photograph of Edith in the hall. They have a wonderful display throughout Jefferson's Ferry of photographs taken by residents. And there was a beautiful one of Edith, of her standing, smiling, happy in the sun, in the garden, holding a hose, watering her plants. And that photo is, I pass it on the way to my friend's apartment, and I always stop and say hi to Edith. Thank you for all of this.
I understand that she was featured also in some of the advertising for Jefferson's Ferry early on, right? Yeah. So I need a couple of helpers up here. Maybe, yeah. And yeah. Now, you're a victim, so you stand there. Chloe, you come here too. You can take out what's in there and put it around their shoulders. The shawl ministry here is giving you a gift of a shawl. This is a ministry of the congregation. These were made by members of the knitting and crocheting ministry, and the hands that made these were laid on each of these shawls at least once. I think you got it. And we said words of blessing at the end of our monthly meetings at least one time. So we're placing this shawl on your shoulders as a symbol of healing and a symbol of the power of love. When you pick it up and pull it around you, I hope you will remember the beauty and feel again the love of this day, of these friends who've come to share with you about your mom and your grandmom, and a fellowship that will remember you long into her and you long into the future. And we're hoping when you miss her, when you're feeling sad, when you're thinking of her, that you'll think to put this around your shoulders and remember this moment and take comfort. So these are the words that are written inside. May divine grace be upon this shawl, warming and comforting and folding. May this mantle be a safe haven, a sacred place of security and well-being, sustaining and embracing in good times as well as difficult ones. May the one who receives this shawl be cradled in hope, kept in joy, graced with peace, and wrapped in love. Enjoy them in good health. With our words of remembrance this afternoon, in our sadness and in our love and hope, we've called Edith's spirit, healed and whole, into the embrace of this community and the wider circle of people who knew and loved her, people who are watching online. Her spirit has returned to its source and will return her ashes to the ground in our memorial garden probably tomorrow. Since she had asked that her ashes be mingled with Andy's, and Andy's are locked in a storage unit for which we do not have the key. So we'll delay that part of the service. We're going to extinguish now. Actually, Shelley, could you go and cue our guy? I'm not sure where he is. We extinguish now our chalice light, but the flame of life's energy still shines inside us, even though it goes out. It moves us, body and soul, and moves through us to others and connects us in that way. We are one together. And can you open the doors for me? We extinguish also this light that has represented Edith among us. We relinquish the visible light she was when she left, carrying that light within us as memory, ours to light our way forward as we continue down the path of our own lives. Victor Vaccaro. He's playing now in the Memorial Garden, where Edith's bones shall return to Long Island earth. She's gone from us, but love abides. Her story and her influence and her presence in some of our very own bodies and hearts will be ours, along with her love to keep for as long as we live. In benediction, this wisdom from poet and retired UU minister Barbara Peskin. This is love abides. Often we are found in our grief and comforted, calmed by some kindness, brought alive again by beauty that catches us undefended. Even when the sun is most thin and far, even at the hour the storm is at its height, we can go through. Renewal nests within sorrow. Love abides, even beyond anger, beyond death. We are held in an embrace, invisible but infinite, moving with all creation between wholeness and fragmentation, moving always toward the one. Small joys and great sorrows pass, and we, with steps uncertain, move on to whatever is next, but continually seen, heard, held by life, infinite and remote, intimate and abiding. Love, do not let us go. Amen. There's a whole lot of food at the back of the fellowship right now. I'm going to need some help undoing it from its bindings, and I hope everyone will have some and take some home, because these ladies are flying out on Monday. Thank you for coming, everyone.